Yeah, my name's Aston, and we're gonna be doing trade and specialization, budget increase, whiteboard, haircut, take 17 or something. I don't even remember, man. So we're doing trade and specialization. So now we trade every day, essentially. A lot of people think just bartering or haggling in different flea markets, but it's actually something we do every single day. This is international trade where we're trading clearly primary resources. Now we trade as in we exchange goods and services for money. In this case, a lot of firms, they'll give us a service, they'll give us a cup noodle, an awesome statue for some money. But in this case, when you're trading resources, they are not after the money, they are after the other person's resource. How much can they get out of you, right, while minimizing their own cost? That's what trading is about, and we're going to get into the economics of trade. But first of all, you got to ask, what does trading do? Now, trade encourages specialization. You can't specialize into one thing when you're doing everything. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is you can't serve two masters at once, basically. You have to focus on one thing means to put all your attention into this one thing, whether it's basketball, boxing, cooking, or maybe your studies. So that's why we specialize. We specialize because it helps us become more productive, which is the second point. So trade-enabled specialization is the first point, and the second point is specialization increases productivity. Now there's, of course, many reasons why this might happen, but the main one is repetition. When you specialize, you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. This repetition will increase your skill and your productivity at doing this task, right? For example, shooting a hoop, let's just say, right? So you're getting better at basketball, and of course you can shoot better. Whoa, nice example. And then obviously as you play more and more and more, your accuracy will increase. In the same way, if you're a chef and you're cutting a lot of vegetables, you will spend less time cutting each vegetable because you get better and better and better at it. Now, this can be applied to anything. I'm just applying it to these two specific things. The next thing is knowledge. Now, the thing is, knowledge is spread across society. Millions of people have knowledge, right? We have these shattered knowledges because we have a small piece of the puzzle, but we don't have the whole thing. We're not all-knowing. And if we were all-knowing, then economics would be more of an allocation problem. This is more of a knowledge issue, right? Because we don't know what's the best price. We don't know what the firm is doing behind its back. So that's where economics comes in. So essentially what trade does is it enables millions of people with limited knowledge to come together and form ideas which benefit society. I have no idea how I remembered that. Okay, cool. The next one is economic growth requires the division of knowledge. Now, I was talking about ideas. Now, to any economic system, right, ideas are the backbone of growth, right? So, economics actually started from Adam Smith, and he was a philosopher. And he had these ideas like the invisible hand and supply and demand. These were all it was just political philosophy at the time. It's all ideas. Now, ideas are insane. They compound, they are exponential because each idea is built on top of each other. That means each idea becomes more efficient, more productive, and it helps with long-term growth. That's why so many countries are encouraging entrepreneurship. That's why so many dictatorships, like for example, Soviet Russia, right? They actually limited entrepreneurship and they kept everything public. But obviously that led to a decline in ideas, and then they were falling behind, and then it collapsed, and now they're more free market based. So, let's see, what's the next part? Comparative advantage. Wow. Now let me explain this. So, There's two kinds of advantages, but I'm going to go over one right now, which is comparative advantage. Now, the comparative advantage essentially means that you can produce at a lower opportunity cost compared to your trading partner. Now, I got a little graph here. Not a graph, but just a diagram. So there's wheat and there's olive oil. This is not the amount of wheat and olive oil. These are the opportunity cost ratios. So this is Spain, and they're producing 1 wheat and they're giving up 2 olive oil. While Portugal, who produces 1 wheat, gives up 2/3 olive oil. Now, you can just do some division and then you should be able to get the ratios. I hope you can do that. Now, if we do the other way around and we just do 2 divided by 2, 1 divided by 2, and then we'll get these ratios. So now, if Spain's producing 1 olive oil, they have to give up 0.5 or 1/2 of a wheat. And Portugal, to produce 1 olive oil, has to give up 3/2 or 1.5 wheats. Now, obviously, as you can see, who has the comparative advantage? Now, let's just look at the wheat. In wheat production, Spain is giving up 2 olive oil to produce 1 wheat, while Portugal is giving up 2/3 olive oil to produce 1 wheat, which means that Portugal has the comparative advantage in olive oil. Sorry, in wheat, because they're only giving up 2/3 olive oil. But over here, Spain has the comparative advantage in olive oil because they only give up half of wheat. That was correct. Does that make sense to you? So Portugal gives up less olive oil compared to Spain, while Spain gives up less wheat compared to Portugal, which means that Spain has the comparative advantage in olive oil and Portugal the comparative advantage in wheat. Now, the theory of comparative advantage, which was a theory developed by David Ricardo, he was a well-known economist, he says that economic welfare and growth will be boosted if these countries trade where they have a comparative advantage and they'll be able to consume outside of their PPC. I didn't label this at all, sorry. Let me do that right now. So this is olive oil, let's just say, and this is wheat. Now look, as you can see, by Spain and Portugal trading olive oil and wheat at these capacities, they'll be able to consume more olive oil / wheat outside of their PPC curve. That means if they didn't trade, they'll be over here around on this line. But because they are trading, they're able to consume outside of that PPC curve, boosting economic welfare, boosting the consumers. And actually, it helps consumers, increases choice, and it's just better for the economy, which is what Ricardo is arguing about. So let's talk about the absolute advantage. Now, I drew another table over here. This is steel and corn for the US and China. Now, the absolute advantage it's in the word absolute. So it means that when a country or an agent can produce more in absolute units compared to another trading partner. In this case, as you can see, the US, this is not opportunity cost. These are actual forecast, not an actual, but these are just made up statistics. So the US can produce 1 million steel or 5 million corn. Cool. And China can produce 4 million steel or 500,000 corn. I don't know the unit, so I'm just gonna put it like this. So as you can see, the US can produce more corn than China, so it has the absolute advantage in corn, while China can produce more steel than the US, so it has the absolute advantage in steel. Now, I hope that makes sense to you. Yeah, so this is the absolute advantage. So we don't really need to care about the absolute, because while absolute, of course, you can take into account the economies of scale gain from this, we'll actually discuss about why we don't talk about that. And this is more important because when you know your opportunity cost ratios, that means you know the gradient. In this case over here, this is about terms of trade. So when you have a gradient like this, right? let's just say, hold on, olive oil and wheat. Okay, now we know that Portugal can produce more wheat than olive oil, and let's just say they can produce a larger amount, which means their gradient will be more flat, right? Because they can produce more wheat than olive oil. But over here, because Spain can produce more olive oil than wheat, their gradient will be more steep. Because as they get closer to olive oil, they can produce more of it, and that's why it's steeper. Now, let's talk about, before we finish that actually, I want to talk about terms of trade. Now, the terms of trade in this case is essentially the index export prices divided by the index import prices into 100. Now, you might be asking, why the hell do we care about this? What does this show? Now, the terms of trade is actually the exchange rate of trade. Now, listen to me, listen to this, right? So, 1 wheat, 2 olive oil, 1 wheat, 2/3 olive oil, right? Why would Portugal trade with Spain if Spain is asking for 2 wheat for 2/3 olive oil? It doesn't make sense. They would not do that, right? Because listen, if they're asking for more wheat than 2/3 olive oil, then why would they trade? They might as well produce the olive oil by themselves. It doesn't make sense. In the same way, if Portugal asks Spain, hey, can I get 2 olive oil for half of the wheat? 2 olive oil for half wheat, they won't trade. It doesn't make sense. So in this case, that's where the terms of trade comes in. So this means that they will only trade in this range, this area. This is the area where it is at its most optimum. Okay, cool. So this is where I don't know if you can see it, but it says Portugal and Spain will not trade unless there's 2/3 olive oil per wheat is to 2. And in the same way, they will not trade if there's a half wheat per olive oil is to 3/2. Does that make sense to you? I hope so, because it makes sense to me. Now, this is all the confusing stuff on the board. Essentially, I just showed it to you graphically that it doesn't make sense for them to trade below this or above this, because at this point they might as well produce it themselves. Then they might as well just be self-sufficient. But if they are within this range, then trading will actually increase their own consumption, is what I wanted to say. Now, trade and wages. This is actually a pretty controversial topic. So, globalization is basically the interconnecting of the world economies. Now, people have always had issues with these immigrants basically stealing their jobs. There's a lot of reasons for this. So, let's go on about it. So the first one is trade is bad because it creates a disparity in wages. The wages in low-cost countries fall while the wages in high-cost countries rise. What? How does that make sense? Well, let me show it to you. So, essentially, these workers from India and Bangladesh, and they come to the manufacturing sector, right? And if you look at it, this is the demand, I should say, right here. And this is the demand for labor, and that is the supply. The supply will shift. As you can see, the price falls down. It goes down over there. So what these workers do is, because they are used to these lower wages, employers know that, hey, we can just pay them a lower wage. So they do. They just lower the wages because there's more supply. These workers just come in, and then it's like, okay, cool. Since there's an increase in the supply for labor, while there's no subsequent increase for the demand, the wage will fall. It's just markets and how they function. While in the same sense, in these developing countries, because there's so limited high-skill workers, right? That means that people that come from abroad, let's just say to India or to these poorer countries like Vietnam, for example, they'll be paid much higher wages. because high skill work is rare, it's scarce, which means if it's scarce, you have to pay more to be able to get it. And because low skill work like construction or maybe being a janitor or something, I don't know, since there's more of it, there's more people from abroad coming in, doing those low skill jobs, the price of the labor will fall, or in this case, the wages will fall. This creates a disparity in the wages. Now, there are a bunch of assumptions and limitations for the comparative advantage. Now, I think we already spoke about the first one, but it's economies of scale. Now, economies of scale means there's falling average cost due to expansion or due to growth. So, essentially, the more you produce, the lower the unit cost, because the cost of production will fall. There's multiple versions of it. There's financial, there's marketing, there's purchasing. There's so many of them, but that's just the general sense of it. So the more you produce, the cheaper it becomes to produce, because the unit price or the unit cost will fall. Now, in this theory, as you can see, these gradients are straight lines. That is not taken into account. We don't take into account economies of scale. The next one is we assume that there's no transportation costs. Spain and Portugal can just trade freely. Now, what if it wasn't Spain and Portugal? What if this was Spain and the US? That's the issue. Now, especially because of Trump, there's tariffs, there's quotas, and there's all these kinds of barriers that limit trade. That means that trade isn't going to be like this. It's not going to be free. So there's tariffs and quotas, there's trade barriers, which are not taken into account. There's economies of scale, which you already mentioned. And then there's transportation costs. While the transportation cost has fallen drastically over the last couple decades, it's still there. It still exists. And for some countries, especially landlocked countries like Chad, trading becomes a lot harder for them because there's more transport costs and they don't have a port, obviously, because they're landlocked. And the next one is perfect information. We assume that Spain and Portugal know the perfect amount. They know their exact opportunity cost ratios for them to trade. Oftentimes, they don't. Oftentimes, they don't know which country to trade with in this case. Why is it Portugal and Spain? Why can't it be a different country? Why can't it be Spain and the US? Why can't it be Spain and China? We don't know. We simply don't have all the information. Like I said in the beginning. The next one is... Who the hell is that? Okay, anyways, the next one is we assume that the factors of production are perfectly mobile. Now, what does that mean? Now, factors of production are essentially what goes into producing the goods. Like, for example, the iPhone, right? So, they're maybe produced in China and stuff. That's the land. Then the labor is going to be the workers producing it. The capital is going to be the machinery producing it. And then the enterprises, the people who came together, made the iPhone, launched it, and sold it. That's it. And they'll have their own rewards. Now, when we're talking about the theory of comparative advantage, Ricardo assumes that these factor inputs are perfectly mobile. That means that, hey, you know what? This is the most efficient. That means that you should give up everything and just focus on this, specialize into this. Now, he makes sense. Like, oh yeah, we can consume outside of our PPC curve, but can we do that? Especially for land, right? Imagine you're growing crops, right? You're already growing crops like tomatoes, basil and rice, let's just say, corn. And now to suddenly make more room for wheat is inefficient, and sometimes it's just not possible for the farmers. That's where, and also we need people to produce these. We need machinery to produce these, right? We need a plant to extract the oil from olives. We need the people who are able to work to farm the wheat. And sometimes these factor inputs aren't flexible. They take a long time to adjust, and they take a lot of incentives to adjust. So we can't always do this so fast. Sometimes it's too costly to do these, which is why this theory, it's still a theory and it's still leading, but it's not done by every country, because you're not supposed to follow this theory like it's your Bible. You should read your Bible, by the way. What else? I would like to say this is overly simplified, by the way. Spain isn't just trading with Portugal. They are trading with a lot of countries, a lot of them, right? So this diagram is just between Spain and Portugal, two countries. Now, what if it was the US? What if there was more countries? What if there was the Netherlands? What if there was Germany? And then so on and so forth. How is Spain gonna sort through all these opportunity cost ratios? How is Spain gonna get all this information and then realize who to trade with at what amount? It's very hard, and it's often inefficient, and it's very inaccurate, which is why that's a limitation of this theory. Now, no theory is perfect, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow it because it's not perfect. Of course it's not perfect. It's economics. Economics is not a perfect science. It is philosophical and philosophical. I'm not gonna stop recording, by the way. It's about the logic. That's why we made this theory. The theory is the logic, and if you follow the logic, if you follow the efficiency, then we'll be able to maximize our welfare. Now, he asks, why do comparative advantages exist? Now, Ricardo, he firmly believes that the differences in opportunity cost ratios, like Spain and Portugal with the 1:2, 1:2/3, is coming from labor alone. So basically, he's saying that the opportunity cost ratios differ because of different labor productivity. Now, you can think that's wrong, but I mean, a lot of economists do think that it's wrong. There's two names, I can't remember. Yeah, Olin and Hexker. Now, these two believed that, hey, it's not just labor productivity. There's also land, there's also capital, which you're not taking into account. So they believe that the differences in opportunity cost comes from input endowments, essentially. So there's capital. Let's take the US and India, right? Now, we know that India has more labor than it does have capital, which means that, assuming we're going by this comparative advantage, that means that they're more productive with their labor. They have a comparative advantage in their labor compared to their capital, while the US has more capital than labor, has more productive capital than labor, which means that they have a comparative advantage in their capital, which is where these opportunity cost ratios differ, and then the trade goes on, etc. So now, you think that this is going to be the same forever? I don't think so. What about in a decade? What about in a century? You think these ratios are going to be the same? I don't believe so. So essentially, since these differences come due to the quality and quantity of factor endowments, these can obviously be changed. Now, we can increase, the US at least, they can increase their labor productivity by investing in training, into education, into government-funded programs. That'll all help. Now, India can also just invest into machinery, into innovation and ideas, and that way they can gain, more, they can gain more productive capital stock. I hope that was phrased correctly because I'm half-assing this right now. I need to hit the gym. So, there are benefits to trade and specialization. As you can see what I mentioned before, with the theory of comparative advantage, you'll be able to consume outside of your PPC more economic welfare. Always a pro. And then there's also economies of scale, absolute advantage, as you can see. So by being able to trade, by specializing, you're able to produce more. And because you're able to produce more, you're able to benefit from economies of scale, lower unit cost. Boom. Cool. The next one is, these are more like the benefits for consumers also. They'll see lower prices. Now, let's just say, but let's take the Spain and Portugal example for example, right? So, if they both specialize, that means that Portugal will be able to produce wheat at a lower unit cost, and Spain will be able to produce olive oil at a lower unit cost, right? And since these costs are lower, they're more competitive, and they're going to be passed on, these cost savings are going to be passed on to customers. So they'll see more competitive, lower prices, which means that they'll have a larger surplus and they'll gain more utility because, hey, we can buy more olive oil for the same price and we can get more high quality olive oil for the same price. That's a pretty good deal to me, dude. Now, the next one is innovation. So because you're trading, that means that there's more competition from abroad, and that's obviously good for the free market because with more competition, there's more choice. With more choice, and there's also lower prices, and these firms are more innovative, reducing the risk of monopolies. And the last one is economic growth. I think I already spoke about this, but China really has grown a lot from industrialization and, of course, becoming more market orientated. So one aspect is their trade. China's biggest export market is actually the US. So by being able to trade with them, they're able to generate more revenue, they're able to buy better goods, they're able to basically better fund their country in this case. So it's better for the economy and for their growth. Now, you can say there's a con to this, like for example, Bangladesh and Vietnam, they are reliant on trade, which is why you see so many sweatshops in the Bangladesh and Vietnam. They know they have to stop it, but their income comes from this, and they know the moment they introduce new laws, new strict laws, these firms like H&M, they're just gonna leave the country and they're gonna go to some other shitty branch economy, like India, I should say. Now, of course, there are costs to this. I already explained one of them was overdependence. So once you become overdependent, you might see, of course, a fall in the quality of life because, like I said, Bangladesh and Vietnam, they don't care about the labor laws anymore. The next one is jobs and structural unemployment. So in the manufacturing sector in the US, because there's so many workers coming from abroad like India and Vietnam, they, like I already explained to you, the wages will fall. There's wage disparities, right? Now, because of this, there's going to be people that don't have jobs. There's going to be people that lose their job because of this. And obviously, that creates structural unemployment because they can't work for this low. Some people, they just can't work for this low, and then they'll be redundant, so on and so forth. The next one is the distribution of income between countries. So trade does not equally benefit all countries. Now, I think that's self-explanatory. Some countries will benefit more to trade than others. I said that we're trading within this zone, right? Now, if we trade a little bit higher over here, that means that we get more olive oil for wheat. And of course, that means Portugal is benefiting. But if we trade over here, that means we're trading more wheat for olive oil, and that means that Spain is benefiting. So in the same way, trade does not benefit all. That means the welfare to one country might be more compared to another. Is it really a con if both benefit? That's the real question. There's also environmental damage, which I don't think I spoke about. If you're trading more goods internationally, more ships, more pollution, and it's just worse for the environment. That's it. We already spoke about terms of trade. Wow. We're done. I was a little less prepared with this one. Sorry. The reason is trade isn't my best topic. So, and also not very good at explaining things I don't know too well. So hopefully by teaching you this, I also learned a little bit. And I hope that I was able to teach you at least something in this, 20-minute video? It's a little bit shorter than my other one. I did put more effort into this one though compared to the other ones because I don't want to be a teacher that just reads off a PPT, that just reads off a book. I want to know the topic. I want to really engage with you. And hopefully one day I'll be able to achieve that level where I can teach you without having to look at this book, where I have this whole book in my head, where I know everything like the back of my hand, and I can just go on at a camera. I think true ability to teach is being able to simplify a topic where that even people who don't have the clue, that don't have the simplest clue of economics. I can't even pronounce it straight. Like, what? I'm gonna cut this part out properly. But if it's left uncut, just know that this is my first time, trying to actually pursue something in life, I guess. I've never been like this. You gotta love yourself. That's all I gotta say. No one's gonna see these parts anyways. Shout out to this awesome stand. Shout out to anybody who watches this video. And shout out to me for making this video. Bye.